Uncovering a heart-wrenching truth. How one dog exposed a fake adoption. Welcome to our channel. We've got an unforgettable story to share with you today, and you won't want to miss it. This is a tale of loyalty, justice, and the incredible bond between a boy and his unexpected hero. Imagine this: an ordinary day at Atlanta International Airport. Travelers are bustling, families are rushing, and business people are lost in their own worlds. But suddenly, everything stops. Why? Because of one sharp bark, a bark that freezes an entire terminal in its tracks. Max, a seasoned canine officer, picks up something his handler, Officer Carter, can't ignore. What started as a routine airport security check turns into a heart-stopping mission to uncover a heart-wrenching truth. Meet Thomas Walker, a man traveling with a young boy named Ethan. Everything looks fine on the surface. Perfect documents, well-dressed, a smile that could deceive anyone. But Max knows better. Something's off. Ethan's fear is palpable, his silence speaking louder than words. What's the truth behind their journey? Why does Ethan refuse to engage? And what happens when this canine's instincts lead to the discovery of a life-changing secret, an adoption that was anything but legitimate? Stick around, because this story isn't just about a missing child. It's about the dog who never stopped barking until the truth was uncovered, saving a child's life from a web of lies. The moment of reunion with Ethan's real mother will leave you speechless. Keep watching to see how this incredible journey unfolds. And remember, sometimes it takes more than just humans to uncover the truth. Sometimes it takes a dog with the heart of a hero. Don't forget to hit that like button, comment below, and subscribe so you won't miss the next emotional story. It was a typical morning at Atlanta International Airport, filled with the usual rush of travelers. Families hurried through the terminals, dragging luggage behind them, while groggy tourists stumbled off red-eye flights. Business people, earbuds firmly in place, were lost in their own worlds, oblivious to the commotion around them. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary until a sharp, forceful bark echoed through Terminal 4. It wasn't just any bark. It was loud, deep, and distinct, carrying through the terminal like a fire alarm. The kind of bark that stops everything in its tracks, freezing the entire area in a single moment of tense silence. Passengers paused, looking around, confused and alert. The source of the disturbance? Max, a seasoned Belgian Malinois canine, trained to detect a variety of threats, from bombs to drugs. But today, it wasn't a threat that had caught Max's attention. It was something far more elusive, something instinctual. Max's handler, Officer Jack Carter, halted immediately. He had worked with Max long enough to know that the dog rarely got it wrong. Max had over 5 years of experience and had been part of more than 30 successful operations. Carter trusted his canine partner's instincts more than any scanner or document. As Max's bark grew louder and more insistent, Carter followed the dog's intense gaze, which locked onto a man standing just ahead. The man was well-dressed, his sharp suit and perfectly groomed appearance making him stand out in the busy terminal. He wore discreet glasses, carrying a leather briefcase, his smile exuding confidence. Beside him was a small boy, around 5 years old, with light brown hair and wide, innocent eyes. The boy was clutching a teddy bear tightly, as if it was the only thing keeping him grounded in this foreign place. Carter's gaze lingered on the child. Something about the boy seemed off. "Excuse me, sir," Carter called, approaching the man calmly. "Would you mind stopping for a moment?" The man turned to face him with a smile. "Is there a problem, officer?" His accent was European, but his English was flawless. "I'm Thomas Walker," the man continued, smoothly pulling out his passport. "I'm a U.S. citizen, traveling through to Brussels with my adopted son. Everything's in order." Carter examined the documents briefly. They looked legitimate. The passports, visas, and even the custody papers from a Texas court were all aligned, confirming the child's name as Ethan Walker. But Carter's unease grew. Something wasn't right. As the man spoke, the boy remained silent, avoiding eye contact. He didn't smile or engage in any way. Even when a female officer crouched down to ask him a question, he didn't respond, not even with a glance. "He's just shy," the man interjected smoothly. "He's been through a lot of trauma. I'd prefer if we didn't push him." Carter felt a knot form in his stomach. While the document seemed correct, Ranger didn't just detect bombs or drugs. He was trained to sniff out fear, tension, and deceit. And the boy's reaction, the way he didn't even acknowledge anyone, told Carter that something wasn't adding up. For protocol, Carter knew they had to take further action. "I'm going to need you to come with us for a private check," he said evenly. The man didn't protest. He didn't question the officer's authority. Instead, he walked calmly toward a side hallway with the boy following silently behind him, their movements almost mechanical. But as they passed a mirrored wall, Carter's gut twisted. He noticed it then, something chilling. Thomas Walker never looked at the boy, not once. It wasn't the protective gaze of a father, nor the tenderness of an adoptive parent. It was more like a man escorting luggage. As the moments ticked by, Carter couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. As the moments passed in the sterile inspection room, the tension thickened. Carter couldn't shake the growing sense of dread gnawing at him. He stared at Walker, who maintained his composure with an almost eerie calm. He didn't seem rattled by the questioning, nor did he react when the evidence against him began to mount. The quiet boy sitting next to him, however, seemed to speak volumes with his silence. Every movement Ethan made, every avoidance of eye contact, every withdrawn gesture deepened the mystery. Carter's mind was working overtime, trying to piece together the puzzle. The documents Walker had presented, everything appeared perfectly in order at first glance. Adoption papers, custody records, travel visas, they were all legitimate on the surface. But something about Walker's demeanor, something about the boy's withdrawn state, told a different story. It wasn't just the lack of affection between Walker and the child that struck Carter. It was the way Walker treated the boy, more like an object to be escorted, rather than a son to be cherished. The boy didn't act like an adopted child. There was no bond. There was no warmth. The silence was unbearable as Carter reviewed the case file again, each fact beginning to settle into place. And then Emily's quiet voice cut through the tension, breaking the stillness. "Can you tell me where your mommy is?" she asked gently, her voice laced with empathy. The child hesitated, his small fingers gripping the crayons in his hands. He looked down at the paper, his face an unreadable mask of fear and confusion. Then, with a voice so soft it barely reached their ears, he whispered, "In Marseille." Emily's heart skipped a beat. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. The boy's words didn't just confirm what they had feared, they shattered the illusion Walker had built around himself. Walker had told the boy that his mother was dead. He had told Ethan he couldn't cry, that he couldn't ask for help because it would mean danger. The manipulation was as chilling as it was calculated. Carter's gut twisted. He knew what this meant. This wasn't just a case of an adoption gone wrong or a missing child lost in transit. This was a calculated abduction. Walker had taken Ethan from his biological mother, Clare Matthews, and had been trying to move him across international borders under the guise of adoption. But why? What was his motive? The answers remained just out of reach, but the more Carter thought about it, the clearer the picture became. Walker had orchestrated a false identity for Ethan, presenting him as his adopted son, when in reality, the child had been taken against his will. The entire adoption story was a lie. It wasn't just the adoption papers that were fake. The entire plan, everything Walker had set in motion, was built on deception. The custody order from Texas was a fabricated document, a tool to manipulate the system. The boy's passport was fraudulent, and now, after months of silence, he had finally spoken the truth. Ethan had been kidnapped. The truth had been buried beneath layers of lies and documents, but it had come to light at last. The case had transformed from a routine checkpoint check to a full-scale child abduction investigation. Emily gently reached over and placed her hand on Ethan's, offering him comfort. Carter, standing just behind them, exchanged a grim look with her. The truth was now clear. Ethan wasn't Walker's son. He was a missing child, taken from his real mother, Clare Matthews, and thrust into a world of lies and fear. And without Ranger, without that sharp bark that pierced through the lies, none of this would have been uncovered. The shift in the room was palpable. Walker's composure started to crack as the weight of his lies bore down on him. But even now he remained eerily calm, only his fingers twitching slightly as if he were waiting for the inevitable unraveling of his story. What had he planned to do with Ethan? Why had he chosen to hide behind fake documents and false identities? The answers were still buried in Walker's mind, and as Carter continued the interrogation, it became clear that this was only the beginning of a much larger conspiracy. But one thing was certain. Ethan's nightmare was finally coming to an end. The child was no longer just a missing case. He was a survivor, and the truth had finally found its way to the surface, all thanks to a dog that refused to stay silent. The hours that had passed since the discovery of Ethan's true identity seemed like days. Officer Carter stood in the hallway, his mind still reeling from the revelations. Ethan Matthews, the child who had been stolen away from his biological mother over 2 months ago, was finally safe. But the weight of everything that had unfolded still pressed down on him. Walker, now in custody, remained calm, almost too calm, offering no further explanation for his actions, leaving Carter with only questions. But for Ethan, the nightmare was finally over, or at least it was supposed to be. It was then that the phone call came, the moment that would change everything. French authorities had located Clare Matthews, Ethan's mother. She had been desperately searching for her son, and the police had issued a red alert for months, but no one had been able to help. Now, thanks to the tireless work of the Atlanta team, Claire was on her way. The urgency in the air was palpable as Carter hung up the phone. A mother was coming to reclaim her child, and everything else, every detail of the case, now felt secondary. The team quickly prepared for the reunion. As the minutes ticked by, Carter felt the knots in his stomach tighten. He had witnessed reunions before, some joyful, some heartbreaking, but nothing prepared him for what was about to happen. He looked over at Max, the canine officer who had been instrumental in uncovering the truth. The dog, usually so alert, seemed oddly still, as though he understood the gravity of the moment. Max had never stopped watching over Ethan, and now, in a way, he was about to help deliver the boy back to the arms of his mother. When Clare Matthews arrived at the airport, her eyes were wide with a mix of fear and hope. She looked exhausted, worn down by the uncertainty and the weight of the past months. But as she stepped into the room, everything changed. Carter stepped aside as Claire approached, her breath catching in her throat when she saw her son for the first time in more than 2 months. She rushed forward, her voice cracking as she called out his name, "Ethan!" In that moment, the world seemed to stand still. The little boy, who had been so silent, so withdrawn, slowly lifted his head. His eyes, once filled with fear, now softened as he recognized the voice that had haunted his dreams. His face, which had been a mask of terror, lit up with the kind of joy that only a mother's touch can bring. Without hesitation, he bolted toward her, arms outstretched, and in a heartbeat, they were reunited. Ethan, once a silent victim of manipulation, was now finally in the embrace of the person who had never stopped looking for him. Carter watched quietly from the doorway, his heart heavy with emotion. The case had been long, and the journey to this moment had been painful. But in this one act, the reunion of a mother and her child, all of the hardship seemed worth it. Max, standing beside him, let out a soft sigh, wagging his tail. It was as though the dog understood that his work here was done. But the story didn't end with this embrace. As Claire held her son close, tears streaming down her face, she whispered something to him. Words of reassurance, words of love that only a mother can give. And then she turned to Emily Hayes, the social worker who had stayed by Ethan's side throughout this ordeal. "Thank you," Claire said, her voice shaky but filled with gratitude. "Thank you for believing me. Thank you for finding him." Emily smiled, wiping away her own tears. "It was Ranger," she said softly, nodding toward the dog. "He was the one who knew. He's the one who saw the truth." It was a quiet, simple acknowledgement, but it carried so much weight. Max had been the key, the one who had refused to stay silent, the one who had never let go of the scent of fear and deception. Without him, this moment might never have come to pass. As the room filled with the sound of Claire's sobs of relief and Ethan's joyful laughter, Carter couldn't help but feel that the world had shifted, just slightly, for the better. The case wasn't over, not yet. But for now, in this room, in this moment, a mother and child were whole again, and that was all that mattered. Max's tail wagged again, slow and steady, as if to say, "Mission accomplished." As the reunion between Claire and Ethan unfolded, the magnitude of what had just transpired began to sink in. For Ethan, it was the beginning of healing. For Claire, it was the moment she had fought for, the moment she had prayed for day and night. But as Officer Carter watched them, he knew this story wasn't just about the mother and son. It was about the unsung hero who had made this moment possible. Max, the Belgian Malinois, stood at the door, his eyes never leaving the boy. his tail moving slowly as he took in the scene. Max had been the one to see through the veil of lies that Walker had carefully woven. While the documents Walker presented appeared flawless on the surface, Max's instinct had been the deciding factor. It was Max who had alerted Carter, his bark sharp and insistent, signaling that something wasn't right. His ability to sniff out fear, tension, and deception had led them down the path to this revelation. Carter, though trained to handle the psychological and emotional challenges of law enforcement, knew that sometimes human instinct wasn't enough, and that was where Max had stepped in. The truth was, Max wasn't just any canine. He was more than a detection dog. He was a partner, a protector, a silent observer who had the uncanny ability to sense things others couldn't. Carter had worked with many canines over the years, but there was something uniquely intuitive about Max. Max didn't need to be told what was wrong. He just knew. His bark wasn't just a warning, it was a message. And in this case, it had been a warning of something far more sinister than Carter had anticipated. As Carter reflected on the investigation, he realized just how crucial Max's role had been in unraveling the truth. Without Max's instinctual reaction, Walker's deception could have easily gone unnoticed. The documents, which seemed airtight, would have kept the authorities at bay. But Max's keen senses had pierced through the layers of lies. While other officers might have been focused solely on the paperwork and procedure, Carter had trusted his canine partner's silent communication. Max's behavior had been the catalyst that set everything in motion, from the questioning to the background checks, until the truth about Ethan's identity was finally exposed. And yet, in this moment of triumph, Max remained a quiet observer. His work wasn't flashy, and it didn't draw attention to itself. He didn't seek recognition. He simply did what he was trained to do: follow his instincts, protect those in need, and never back down from a challenge. As Claire held her son tightly, Max stood quietly by Carter's side, his body relaxed but alert. He knew his job was done, but his loyalty was unwavering. Max wasn't just a dog. He was part of this family, too. Later, as the team moved to process the next steps in the case, Carter found himself reflecting on the silent but powerful bond between man and animal. Max had saved Ethan, not just by detecting a threat, but by saving him from a life of uncertainty and fear. The dog's instinct had cut through the facade of a carefully crafted story, and in doing so, he had given Ethan a chance at a future. As Carter bent down to scratch behind Max's ears, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. "Good boy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Max wagged his tail in response, the simple gesture speaking volumes. Max had done his part, and now Ethan could begin to heal. It wasn't just the law enforcement that had solved this case. It was the silent, faithful companion who had never stopped watching, never stopped listening, and never stopped believing that the truth would eventually come to light. And as Carter watched Ethan and Claire, he realized that sometimes the greatest heroes come in four-legged forms. The dust was beginning to settle, but the case was far from over. Thomas Walker, despite his composed exterior, was now facing a reality he could no longer avoid. What had started as a seemingly routine checkpoint had escalated into an international case of child abduction, fraud, and deceit. Carter, still processing the intense events, knew this wasn't just about the physical reunion of Ethan and Claire. It was about something much larger, a system that had failed to protect the child for over 2 months, and a man who thought he could outsmart justice. In the wake of Ethan's reunion with his mother, the investigation took on a new urgency. The authorities dug deeper into Walker's background, uncovering a trail of fraudulent financial transfers, fake legal documents, and links to corrupt officials across several countries. What seemed like a simple adoption gone wrong was now revealing itself as part of a much larger, far-reaching network of international child trafficking and legal manipulation. The question lingered in the air. How many more children had fallen victim to this web of lies? While the authorities pieced together the details of the fraud, one thing was certain. Ethan had narrowly escaped a life of manipulation and abuse. His real mother, Claire, had been searching for him relentlessly, but her cries had gone unheard by a system that often overlooked the powerless. It wasn't until Max, the K-9 officer, had sniffed out the truth that everything began to unravel. Had it not been for the dog's instincts, the case might have ended differently. The documents presented by Walker, the smooth talk, the calm demeanor, it could have all been brushed aside, but Max's bark had changed everything, piercing through the layers of deception. Now, as the legal system began to grind forward, the authorities focused on Walker. In the interview room, his arrogance from earlier had vanished. He now sat pale and restless, his face contorted with the realization that his carefully constructed lies had finally crumbled. Carter stood across from him, watching as Walker's facade began to crack under the weight of the evidence. The documents, the wire transfers, the fake custody papers, everything had been laid bare. And yet Walker still refused to come clean. "I thought I was doing what was best for him," Walker muttered, his voice shaking. He needed a life, a real future, not the chaos of his birth mother. But his words fell flat in the face of the overwhelming evidence. He hadn't just failed to act in the child's best interest. He had taken Ethan from his family, from his home, and had tried to erase everything that made him who he was. As the hours passed, the legal machinery continued to turn. In the courtroom, Walker's fate was sealed. The prosecutor laid out the facts of the case, presenting irrefutable evidence of kidnapping, document forgery, and a network of international corruption. The charges against him were grave, and the public's outrage grew with each new revelation. The courtroom was tense as the judge prepared to hand down the verdict. But it wasn't the courtroom drama or the legal wrangling that left Carter with the deepest sense of resolution. It was the moment when, after months of searching, Clare Matthews was finally awarded full custody of her son. Ethan's life was no longer in the hands of a man who viewed him as a possession. It was in the hands of the woman who had never stopped believing in him. Carter stood outside the courthouse, watching as Claire and Ethan left, hand in hand. For the first time in months, Claire walked with her head held high, a quiet confidence returning to her stride. Max, still by Carter's side, wagged his tail as if understanding the significance of the moment. There would be no cheers, no celebrations, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served. As Claire and Ethan moved on to rebuild their lives, Carter knew this moment marked the beginning of a new chapter. But it also marked the end of a case that had shown him just how far the reach of corruption could go, and how sometimes it took more than laws to uncover the truth. It took someone who refused to remain silent. It took Max. The days following the trial were filled with the quiet hum of a case well handled, but Carter knew that for Max the work was far from over. The dog had been through it all. His nose had uncovered a twisted web of lies. His His bark had triggered a chain of events that led to the rescue of Ethan Matthews, and now, as the case came to a close, it was time for Max to take a step back. But Max wasn't just another working dog. He was a hero. His actions had led to the salvation of a child, and the impact he had made on Ethan's life was immeasurable. Yet, despite the praise and accolades that came his way, Max remained ever humble. His retirement was a quiet affair. No fanfare, no grand ceremony. After years of distinguished service, including over 30 successful operations, he was ready for the next chapter. Carter, too, had been with Max through it all, and the thought of their partnership coming to an end left him conflicted. Max was more than a canine unit. He was a trusted partner, a companion who had always been there, watching his back, sniffing out danger, and leading the way when all hope seemed lost. The day of Max's retirement ceremony arrived, and while it was simple, it was deeply emotional. As Max stood in front of the small gathering of law enforcement personnel, receiving his Medal of Valor, it wasn't the medal that caught everyone's attention. It was the bond between Carter and Max, the unspoken understanding, the shared history that spoke volumes in the way Carter gently scratched behind the dog's ears, or the way Max's tail wagged just once in acknowledgement. Their work was done, but their connection would never fade. Max had given everything to his job, and now it was time for him to rest. Yet, even in retirement, Max's legacy would continue to inspire. It wasn't long before Carter realized that Max's contribution to Ethan's life went beyond law enforcement. As the Matthews family started their new chapter, Claire began to recognize something that couldn't be measured by medals or awards. Max had given Ethan something far more valuable than protection from danger. He had given him trust. For the first time in months, Ethan felt safe. Max's unwavering presence had helped the boy find his voice, his smile, and his sense of belonging. The dog wasn't just a companion. He was a bridge to a better future. And so when Claire approached Carter with the idea of adopting Max, it didn't come as a surprise. She knew, as did Carter, that Max had earned a place in their lives. He had already given so much, and now it was time for the family to give back. The idea of adopting Max felt like a natural progression. He had protected Ethan, but now it was time for him to be part of their family in a deeper way. Carter, understanding the depth of their bond, agreed. Max's retirement was no longer just about his time as a working dog. It was about his new role as a beloved member of the Matthews family. The transition from working dog to family companion was seamless. Max, now free from the constraints of duty, could finally enjoy the simple pleasures of life, rolling in the grass, chasing after tennis balls, and laying beside Ethan as the boy drifted off to sleep. But even in his retirement, Max remained the vigilant protector he had always been. His watchful eyes never left Ethan, always sensing when the boy needed reassurance or comfort. The bond between them was unmistakable, and in their quiet moments together, it was clear that Max's role had evolved, but his purpose had not changed. He was there to keep Ethan safe, just as he had always been. As the months passed, Claire reflected on how much her life had changed. Not just because her son was back, not just because justice had been served, but because Max had been there to guide them through the darkest hours. Without him, none of this would have been possible. Carter, too, felt the weight of Max's legacy, knowing that the dog had made a difference in a way that words couldn't describe. And so, as Max lay at the foot of Ethan's bed, Carter realized that sometimes the true heroes are the ones who never ask for recognition, the ones who simply do their job and leave a lasting imprint on the lives they touch. Max's retirement wasn't just a new beginning for him, it was the start of a new chapter for the Matthews family, a chapter built on trust, love, and the enduring bond between a boy and his dog. Thank you for watching this heartfelt story about the bond between Max and Ethan and the extraordinary efforts of the police and K-9 team in uncovering the truth and rescuing children from abduction. This is not just a story about the loyalty of four-legged companions, but also about the strength of family love and the relentless pursuit of justice. We would love to hear your thoughts on this story. What do you think about Max's role in helping to find Ethan? How do you view the relationship between humans and their pets, especially in such challenging situations like this? Can you imagine what life might be like for a child after escaping the trauma and fear that Ethan endured? Please share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. We greatly appreciate your support and positive feedback as it helps us continue sharing meaningful and touching stories like this one. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next video.